Thank you very much, Babishans. We are on this weekend, this good Saturday night, for once again on the Alliance for Change on the move. I have with me, of course, Colin Haynes and Brian Nobrega, two very young leading members of our party. And of course, there are very many topics that we would like to deal with this evening on the program. But we're going to start with Parliament. As you know, the PPP has won the elections, and the opposition has done pretty badly. We don't want to go into the reasons as to why that has happened, except to say that at this stage, we are somewhat wondering when Parliament will be convened. Parliament is an important institution, especially after the dissolution of the last one, the holding of elections onto the new one, and so that we'll have to have what is called the convening of Parliament as early as possible. I would want to just inform Babishans that from our reading of the Constitution, it is largely a period of about 4 months from the dissolution date that Parliament is to be convened. But generally, you want the early entry into Parliament of those parliamentarians that have been named. Additionally, you want also councillors and so on from the various regional councils, regional democratic councils, to be starting off with their duties and functions. But somehow it has not started. I would like to hear the views of Brian. Could you say what implications this would have, the late convening of Parliament?
Yes, Kema. Well, as you know, Parliament has not been um, called yet, and it has been about 2.5 months. And basically, the executive branch of government is managing the funds right now and preparing for a new budgetary cycle. And these are some of the things that will greatly affect the people, because although the PCP did win and did win by a good margin, they still didn't win the entire country at 100% landslide, and there's still pockets of areas within the country that are opposition areas, and these areas are now voiceless. They have nobody to represent them, nobody to make representation of projects in their communities and in their regions. So for regions that would have been traditionally PPP areas that would have now gone to the opposition, they have nobody to make representation for them in parliament or at the RDC level to implement things that would make their lives better. This is just one of the many things that not calling parliament has is the effects of. Right?
Thanks, Brian. It is true that the people are left without representation for a whole month and a half now, and one would have expected that you want to see, namely the parliamentarians, who, by the way, have already been named by their respective parties, and it's just a swearing in, and of course. But I am hearing that there might be some problems with a consensus, that the PPP has not found a consensus name for being the Speaker of the House. There are some who have argued that Mr. Mansour Nadir, a very close friend of mine, that he shouldn't go back there, and they're trying as best as possible to put somebody that probably will be of complete loyalty to the PPP instead of loyalty to the institution of Parliament. And probably that is one of the reasons why that they are working on it. But Colin Haynes, as a Democrat, what do you say about this late or non-reopening as of date for the Parliament?
It's a great privilege to be on the show, Kemraj. I think, Parliament is the most central and one of the most powerful arms within our constitution. And so I believe that it would be advantageous that now the elections is over. We've got a president now for over a month. Then we get on with the business of representing the people, and Parliament is that representation of the people. And so, as Brian was saying, with Parliament also comes the regional democratic councils, because remember, parliamentarians serve more at the federal or the central government level, and they reach out to their constituents as well. But the RDCs are more on the more local level, and so both arms have to function hand in hand so that we have a more unified and a more supreme democracy. In relation to the speaker, I mean, my interaction with Mr. Nadir is not. I don't see him as a bad person per se, but I believe that over the course, some of his rulings in Parliament was just not advantageous. It was somehow sometimes outrageous. Like for instance, blocking the word corruption. That's a common word. I mean, if you whether you say it or not, it still exists. I would think that he would go back if given the opportunity. But something, Kimraj and Brian, I think also it's time for us to see a difference. I don't recall. We've probably never had a woman parliament speaker. It's time for us to get a woman speaker, or a speaker of indigenous descent. I think there is these groups of people who have, over a period of time, they have been disadvantaged, and so I believe that one of the things the government could do to show that they really care about these vulnerable or disadvantaged group is us getting an indigenous speaker. I think it'll be great for the indigenous people, or a woman speaker.
No, that's an interesting point you're raising, but I know the PPP. I have come from the belly of the beast, as you know, and it is extraordinarily difficult to get that kind of inclusion of probably the woman, indigenous woman, whatever, because knowing them and their very centralist kinds of methods, democratic centralism is their organizing principle. They would want somebody that will be totally loyalist in that parliament, and probably they're looking for one who can be of that nature, and that is the reason why they're probably having some difficulties. But I have also heard that there might be some reasoning that goes with the fact that they don't want Azruddin Mohammed to be named leader of the opposition. But quite frankly, having won the most seats in the opposition, he will, and he's shown an interest, he will certainly be, because it is from the members of the opposition, the parliamentarians who are opposition members, who will then select. And having won 16 seats,
right,
he would have that majority in the opposition and will certainly. So the PPP can't prevent him. But also, if you get a convened parliament as of early October, it's another. It is denying opposition members like 1 month's salary, if you understand what I mean. Because upon their swearing in, they then become members of parliament, and they get their salary and so on. So you deny them for another whole month, and probably on the early part of November, then you do it. But you need immediately after an elections the convening of parliament, notwithstanding that this constitution, I think it's Article 69, indicating that you have a 4 months from the date of dissolution of parliament. What it does is that it strengthens the fact that an institution of such significance and importance and prominence is going to be rolling out its duties and functions to the people of Guyana. starting with whatever it is that the parliamentarians would want to start with and what the government would want to start with. I am absolutely certain that at this stage, the preparation of the budget is an important thing. You also have questions that will be asked by many of the new parliamentarians, and that is why it should be convened as early as possible. I would hope then that keeping democracy alive in Guyana, as the AFC will now be doing through these programs, now that it doesn't have a seat in Parliament, will necessarily mean that we have to make the demands and urge people to support the demands too, that it be convened as early as possible so that very vital questions that are going to be asked of ministers, especially in health, education, finance, and so on, about our oil monies, cash transfers, and a whole host of other things, that we can start getting that from members of parliament who would have been sworn in as early as possible. Now we can move on from that. Oh, sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Even the new cabinet members and ministers that have been named that have not yet taken the oath of parliament to be MPs, the rhetoric that the PDP is talking about these anti-corruption policies and things that they want to implement. They will need legislation to pass, and as Parliament is the legislative arm of government, they are denying themselves the opportunity to take Guyana forward.
That is so true. That is so true. But they will always say that they have a constitutional timeline, and that constitutional timeline is the 3rd of November. But I think in 2011, a similar thing had happened, and the timeline had passed. 4 months had passed, and we had to carry them to court. And although they had passed the timeline, I think the court ruled that the timeline of 4 months is not mandatory, it's just directory. And then the court ruled that they should do everything reasonably possible to convene parliament as early as possible. That was when we had gotten a minority PPP in government. So they were just trying to delay the process in 2011, I think. And I that instituted a court litigation compelling them to pass. But by the time the court could have heard the matter, and given a written decision, they then convened, but the court indicated that, they should have done that and must do it all reasonably practicable time within that time period. All right, well, Brian and Colin, we can move on to a very important topic that is in the mind of so many people, and that has to do with cash transfers. It was promised by this government that if they were to win, there are going to be cash transfers. I think they had increased it to $200,000, but now they're talking about $200,000 per household. And there might be some element of deception on the part as to what will be happening. And then we got from the news that Mr. Vikram Bharat is indicating that it is not a very good thing to do cash transfers. There are some negatives about it. You want to make some comments about that?
Yes,
Colin?
I can. Yes, definitely. So I think the minister, when I've heard the comments, I was kind of disappointed, because number one, he talks about the sustainability of cash transfers, something that is really common all over the world. Then he went on to make the comparison to the United States. Well, I wrote a response to that, and I had to let him know that the great state of Alaska gives cash transfers to its members. The United States, if not, to me, it's one of the largest ATM machines for cash transfers, because not only we give cash transfer to folks from oil revenues in Alaska. Every time we had a catastrophe in this country, whether it was COVID pandemic, we had a financial crisis in 2008, we give cash transfers to the people. And then there are some programs that just literally give you cash because of vulnerability and so forth, like food stamps, welfare. They get TSA cash. If you become unemployed in this country, you get a cash transfer as well. So I don't know what Vikram Bharat is talking about. I think that he would do very well if, as the subject minister, if he could pay attention, well, not pay attention, but do some good research, perfunctory research about cash transfers. Now, in the Middle East, I've went to the UAE, which famously they talk about Dubai and he reference as well. There's different models that have been taken there. They may not give out a cash transfer, but this is a country that has 1 million natives, 9 million immigrants, and the 1 million people, they get free housing, utilities, they get first in line for joining the military and other jobs and so forth. Same as Qatar and these other Middle Eastern countries or the Gulf states that they call them. So again, I believe for Guyana, it's not about whether we do cash transfers or not. It's whether we come up with a model that is sustainable. And I believe cash transfer is part of it to release the cost of living. I think we need to, invest in social services such as education, healthcare, taking care of the vulnerable and so forth, and infrastructural development, which is happening in some cases. But like I said, I think the minister's got this one wrong. I think he needs some schooling when it comes to cash transfers around the world.
I think they're testing the Guyanese people whom they promised to give cash grants transfers to. Now that they've won the elections, and they, as I have indicated on so many occasions, would want in a parliamentary system to set up a lot of the monies that are coming in from the oil, not to be for direct cash transfers, to help the vulnerable, as you mentioned, and to help people that really doing pretty badly, although we are in our economy, but also to give to friends and family on the occasion of what you call the contractor class. So
Mm-hmm.
instead of giving direct transfers, which if you were to give a $100,000 or $200,000, it will come up with $160 billion to help all Guyanese, all the Guyanese of 18 years and over who are resident in this country, approximately 500,000 people, right? It will come up with $160 billion. But when you take $666 billion and you gave it for infrastructural works, over $120 billion profits out of that $660 billion go to a set of contractors who will get all the contracts. And that could be
Mm-hmm.
in the form of about 500-600 people alone. So whereas you can get the transfers going directly to poor people, rich people, everybody in Guyana, and it is more diverse in its spread, you are going to have a budget that will come up with a lot of infrastructural work. And that infrastructural work is going to ensure that certain friends and family in the big contractor class, in the middle contractor class, and associates of the PPP, their flatterers, and so on, their favorites, as we say, they will get it. But Guyanese, especially the Barbicians, must understand, because Barbicians came out again in full support for them, and they must not allow the PPP, whether via through this Bharat or Bharat Jagdeo, to deny them cash transfers, because they can afford it now. This year already, I think they have collected in the vicinity of about 2.8 billion US dollars. That's lots of money, probably more than that. And the last quarter, they will have quite a lot of money. And to go and make the argument, as my good friend Vikram Bharat was trying the other day, I don't know how persuasive or authoritative he was, but it is not to say that it is not sustainable in a country like Guyana. Well, it is going to make the population that probably voted for them even help them out in that regard. You got to start helping out the people that helped you win the
Right.
elections. So it is important that they start and they don't deceive the people. Brian, what's your thoughts on it? Because I know every young person in this country would want to have some cash transfers coming his and her way.
My thought is this: the house, 200,000 for a household will not fly. We had household transfers and it was not equitable. It proved a cesspool of corruption, and we know if they do
Yeah.
household, it will be massive corruption. Guyana is producing between 720 to 920 barrels of oil per day right now. The Hammerhead project is not started as yet. But when the Hammerhead starts, it will go over to 1 point something million barrels per oil per day. We will be producing, well, we probably are producing more oil than we have people in the country per day. And we're still going to sit and tell people living in poverty who can barely afford one decent meal a day that, oh, we can't afford to give you cash. Because that is what the cash grants are supposed to do. They're supposed to bridge the gap between the persons who have and the persons that don't have. Everybody, it's a way to level the playing field, and then as a government, you implement measures through your parliament that can bridge the gap further, to bridge the inequality between the rich and the poor. Because if you look at the persons working within the oil and gas sector, their salaries are far more than persons working within the traditional public sector and the traditional private sector. And so, for these simple reasons, we have the extraordinary hyperinflation that is currently going on in Guyana. You know, they're working on fixing the foreign exchange problem, but they're not working as assiduously on fixing the hyperinflation problem that the ordinary citizens and the people who are here all this US that is being circulated and they're asking themselves, are we getting quarter, a third of this kind of money? You know, everybody wants to know who are the people that are injecting this kind of money into the economy and what can they do? The working class continuously is overlooked and measures are not being in place by to curb it. And direct cash transfers are one way to do it.
That's right. And that this brings the question of what, Brian, you think they ought to do in preparing for the 2026 budget. Are there any special features that you'd like to see there that they can probably deliver to the people now in relation to making life better in the year after they've won the elections?
So, I'm glad you asked this much. There are a number of things that during the campaign period the AFC alluded to things that could have been done. Reduction in taxes, PAYE taxes, reduction in VAT, all of these things. You have the money now from oil. You store up, allow your citizens to live a better life. You know, there's so many issues that we as a nation of such a small population should not be facing. To this date, we've spent billions, trillions of dollars on GWI, and still the water isn't of any standard. You can't bring the water from the tap, you know. And we're talking about a modern country and a modern society. These are some of the basic things that need to be there. We have the issue with the blackouts, roads. I mean, we're building all the roads, but we're stuck in traffic for hours. All the roads are building, but the traffic isn't going anywhere because everybody's going into one zone. There's no decentralization in there. People are going to the park to get a pass, where they have to spend an entire day to submit a form and take out the photograph. In a technological age. And so,
No, it's a
yeah,
terrible situation, and I learned that only today there was a huge congestion at the Kanji Bridge. Some problem at the Kanji Bridge, and it caused almost a mile long kind of congestion, traffic jam on both sides. Look, we have to start thinking, of course, doing things collectively and doing things by engaging the opposition. And that is one of the other things that I want to bring out here. Engage the opposition in this anti-corruption committee that His Excellency President Irfan Ali has talked about. I noticed two very important topics that came out within the past couple of days was this talk by him of an anti-corruption committee and also from Minister Onig Waldron, the now Home Affairs Minister, concerning the Guyana Police Force and the demand that she made out of from them that she wants to see corruption at all levels, the upper level, middle level, the lower levels, come to a halt. This corruption thing has really done damage to that police force, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, where you had all the recommendations done by Russell Combe and also Sitlington, the experts that came from America, all have been shelved literally. And I would be hoping that involved in the anti-corruption move by both Onig Waldron and the president, that these recommendations could be picked up back and at least be realized in the form of concrete action being taken and the recommendations being made, being fulfilled. It is a damned state that has a police force that is supposed to serve and protect, doing the things that we have heard of over the last couple of years. And so it is very, very vital. I want to see, and I make the point here, this anti-corruption committee that must not be made up of just loyalists and flatterers of the government, but it should be made up of lots of other people, and even people from CARICOM. CARICOM came here and oversaw elections and in 2020, of course, and put them back in government after they said so many things went wrong. So we must allow, even at the police level, even at a governmental level, the scrutinizing eyes of people that can come from a CARICOM situation or location. And so I will be urging that there be the implementation of these committees and at least leadership that is going to move away from just thinking that they're in charge and they must run the place. What's your views on this, Colin?
Yeah, so I want to take the president at his word, that he's very serious about corruption in Guyana. And I also want to take the minister. She's a new minister. Oftentimes, my biggest concern with the PPP is, or the administration is, how do we get this done? And Kemraj, you were the minister at one time. You talk about those recommendations. One of the things that I believe that is really affecting Guyana at all levels is institutionalization. And when I talk about that, I don't mean a building. We think that building buildings is somewhat an institution. It revolves around constant education and training, right? So you need a well-trained police force. You need one that is respectable. You cannot wear that badge of honor and be disrespected or disrespectful, and that includes taking a bribe. I think at some point in time, yes, the government has a responsibility. But I remember talking to my friend from Barbados, and in London once, and she told me, she said, "Listen, you see the problem that y'all got in Guyana with corruption." She said, "Bajan polices would never even think about taking a bribe, because they put that value on their country." And so I believe it also starts from the top. But oftentimes, as you're seeing, Kemraj, is that the top is where the problem is. So you got the bottom is looking up at the top, and they're seeing that the top is enraged in corruption. You got a member of the police force that was sanctioned by the U.S. government. So I mean, if the president is serious about these things, then he needs to tomorrow morning remove all those corrupt elements, and you may need to do some introspection on the current commission of the police force. I know he's well beyond his time constitutionally, and I think also you need to spend more time in training education. We need to start looking at crime as a science, right? And I know, for instance, in New York City, they've played with different models. I'm sure you know some of these models that was given to you by the UK and so forth, Scotland Yard and them. They're models to dealing with crime, right? There's one called the broken window model. There's another one where they question you and they give you what different information from the other person and see what kind of feedback they get. I can't remember. It's like a good cop bad cop kind of thing. So, and these have all proven at different levels and different countries to be very effective. Also, I want to reiterate the part where the quality assurance or the service piece, where when you wear that badge of honor, when you wear that crest, that you represent your country, that you love your country, and that you sworn, and this was an oath you took, not to be corrupt, to execute your job, and to serve and to protect. And like I said, I hope that the minister now, with the president, can work hand in hand and sort of, you know, bring this thing under control. And so it brings back favorability, it brings back confidence to the Guyanese people, that we have a police force that really does the job of serving and protecting the people and not serving and protecting themselves.
There can be no other humbug at the local level when you're stopped by policemen, questioned for a lot of foolish things, and then there is a request for a small piece.
Hmm.
I have literally been complained to by so many people, and it doesn't happen only in relation to policemen on the road and traffic cops and all of that. It happens also for any other service that is provided. You want a birth certificate, somehow you got past a small piece. You want a death certificate for a deceased member of your family, you got to do it. And the thing has gone real bad. And
Hmm.
I believe that one of the institutions that can help solve this wicked thing that is going on is a police force that could be professionalized. And, one big problem I had over the last 5 years, being a parliamentarian from 2020 to 2025, was not getting from the PPP government's minister, Rupson Ben, the convening of meetings of that very important security committee of parliament, the parliamentary security committee, where you can question the minister of home affairs in relation to almost everything. We had put that into the constitution in that robust constitutional period of 2010, 2009 period and so on. But 2002, going back to 2002, and the whole point of it was that when Parliament was convened in 2020, Mr. Ben, now the advisor to the minister, had one meeting. We were named ourselves from the various parties to attend this kind of parliamentary security meeting. And after that, not one meeting was ever called again. So we did not know what was the strategic report for the year 2022 2022 to 2026. We do not know what the strategic report as to the firemen or the commissioner, well, the person in charge of prisons, you know,
Mm.
and what they were planning to do in relation to spending the government's money on these institutions. No oversight whatsoever. And our constitution provided for this parliamentary committee, made up of, I think, 5 government members and 4 opposition members. Not a single meeting after the convening meeting just to select who will represent people in the committee, the parties in the committee. None whatsoever. Not a single one. And I constantly was talking about it at Parliament. I was constantly talking about it in my speeches, wheresoever I do my opposition press conferences and so on. But nobody was listening to us. They do not understand that you can ask for so many things. Where is the protocol that a commissioner of police can collect $8.5 million to give his friend as a wedding gift?
Hmm.
Where is the protocols that says that these things could be done? And a number of other things. And also questioning them, calling the commissioner of police. In my administration as public security minister, we had several meetings whereby the PPP came and they questioned Silal Prasad and Ram Narayan. They questioned the Samuels from the prison, and they questioned the fire chief and so on, and asked all manner of questions. But we, in that 2020 to 25, 2020 to 25 period, not one single parliamentary security committee meeting was held. None. So you could not ask or get to know what was going on in the home security, the parliamentary thing. Now, parliamentary oversight is fundamental. That is why our constitution provided for it. That is why the standing orders provided for this thing. And I am urging Ms. Waldron not to be like Mr. Ben and not have the meetings convened. She must convene the meetings and get the parliamentarians there who will want to ask questions about the police force and what is happening and so on, so that we can also represent the ordinary people who have been probably suffered at the hands of policemen at that parliamentary level, to know the policy of the new minister, to know the policy of the government via that new minister, and so on. And that is where we will engage via these institutions. You just don't go and say in 2009 or whenever we had passed this constitutional amendment that, oh yes, there shall be a parliamentary security committee in which all questions of operational and policy matters will be dealt with in this committee. And then you do not have it functioning. And then the entire country is unaware of what is happening. It was a big shame, quite frankly. But that being said, I want to hear the views of Brian on these things, because Parliament committee, like the Congressional Committee of what you have there in America, Colin, is an important thing.
Right.
Every now and again, you can call a meeting. If there is a big problem with a policeman or whatever it is, you can convene the meeting, and you have to have a chairman who can convene the meeting, not block it from happening, taking instructions from Jagdeo or anybody else. And I believe, honestly, that the president, Irfaan Ali, wants to see a better day under his second term of office. And so he will have to ensure that there is an inclusive process that is going to allow these things. But Brian, you think you could make some projections as to how we're going to see the governorship of the security sector?
I'm not sure for projections, but I could say something that I would like to see implemented. Firstly, I believe that the police force should be renamed police service, because the police officers must first and foremost understand that they are the servants protect the citizens of Guyana, not to force us into them. That is not what the jobs are. The job is to protect us in some instances from each other and to serve us and guide us to make the right decision. And because there are a number of good police officers
Yeah.
uh, marred by the actions of others. Um, and so we can't label all of them as bad and corrupt. And like you rightly said, those corruption, you can't cut off corruption from the tail and leave it rotting at the head. You have to cut it off from the top. So with the minister saying that okay, we need to they want to cut on corruption and the president is setting all these measures in place, then we must start from the beginning. Ensure that any member of his cabinet and the executive branch found in any corrupt deal is immediately fired and not just put it in a position, we shuffle into a position receiving all the benefits. If you're caught in corruption, you must be, I don't want to say they must go up to the extent that China went, but they must be
Zero
reacting
tolerance.
for every action.
Yeah.
Exactly. There must be repercussions for your actions, right? And measures must be put in place, policy must be put in place, legislation must be put in place in regards to corruption. If you're serious about weeding out corruption, you have to not only legislate it, but you have to enforce it. Because that is something that has been a grave issue for Guyana for the longest while. We have a lot of legislation, but nobody could enforce the legislation. No agency that actually enforces these things. And so, and if we're serious this time around, and the president would like to preserve his legacy going forward, because when his time is up from 2030, what happened between this 10 years period, he will have to live with all the actions, and history will tell whether he was a good president or a bad president for these two terms. And so he has to know what kind of legacy he wants to leave for his children. You know, they are the ones that will have to live up to his legacy. You know, and the party itself has to look at what they're going to do in terms of their legacy. They've been known to be the most corrupt, and all the corruption indexes when the PDP were in government, the country was at its lowest. It's only during the coalition period that the country climbed out and made recommendations and followed recommendations on how to keep corruption down within the country. And so persons, and like you rightly said, everything as the layman is said, they looked for the job that have the hustling, where they could get a kickback and a side piece, you know. And so we have to look at how we're going to do these things out to make the Arab better place because we're going to have persons coming from all over the world do business in the Arab. And the way the business is done in the Arab is everybody passes the money to somebody to get things done in a speedy or in a somewhat manner, right? And oftentimes if you don't pass the money to the right person, your business is on start and things like that should not happen. You know, if the procedure is A, B, C, then it should follow an A, B, C, and not a frustration, you know, because we will lose a lot of money, a lot of capital, a lot of solutions if we keep nations keep wrapped in corruption.
That's correct because studies have been done, and when people see a country that is corrupt, its institution, especially its police force and its public service, investment do not come. It is fundamental, and Burby should understand this. Barbicians will know that when the family members come from overseas and they want whatever is the service from the public service or the police service or the teaching service, whatever the service, they, if they have to pay money, they look upon the system very negatively. They go back in America and talk, oh, you gotta pay money for this, you gotta do this, you got. and it is not a nice system at all. And so the investment class that wants to come to the country, knowing that there's an oil boom in Guyana, they will hesitate. They will say, "Boy, well, even if we come money there in Guyana now, but the trouble is, so much money you got to pass, and things can be delayed as a result. A man wants to open a company, and he got to get this license, and he got to get that license, and then he got to pay $500,000 for license and all kind of thing." And we have had, even from that girl that had done that very important interview about Sue. Remember, you got to
By
pass
Sue.
money to certain important place in the country before you can get your work done, and so on. And you got to pass it through me. And when it's found out the man got some house next to the former president, and so on. Look, we have to stop all of that. And I am urging in my own way, and I will be doing that through these programs, although I want to slide off the political scene. I would urging people like you, the two of you especially, bright youngsters, Colin and Brian, to keep this work going. Okay, we do not have any parliamentary seats. The trouble, however, is that democracy needs movements on the ground, voices of people like you to articulate that this will be the better way of doing things. Getting the parliamentary committee functional, speaking out, and trying to emphasize to members of the public, like the Barbicians, that we have to do away with corruption and bribery and all of that. And so that you too, Barbicians, can demand that this is wrong. A lot of them, when you go to their homes and so on in Barbies, they tell you how this contractor buyer get all the contract, them not get none, and so on. And then you find them still voting for them. And I say, whatever it is, the trouble is they have to say quite clearly that this we should not stand for. And it calls for some will, it calls for some decency and some honesty at the individual level for that to be done. Otherwise, we're not going to get the state that is going to be with the kind of happiness, the kind of solidarity, the kind of honesty that we want to see, so that the next generation can then stand on our shoulders and make it even still a greater society. You know? What's your views on that, Colin? It is important that honesty be our policy.
Correct. It's something that I talk about quite a lot because I have an infant, and I always look and say, well, you know, kids today growing up in Guyana are looking at the older folks. I mean, it is one of the reasons that I think that, folks do involve in corrupt practices is they say, listen, I look on the top and I see this person corrupt. Why I can't do this? And we got to the point where we kind of now gauge in to say, well, okay, if you thief in millions of dollars, I can just take 100,000 here, and that's fine, and that's not. And so I believe that, this country, in order for our country to move forward, we have to embrace a sense of morality, a sense of dignity. Look, to be honest with you, it doesn't look good and it doesn't sound good in a very corrupt society, but it's absolutely necessary to build a nation. I remember going to Singapore, right? And Singapore is oftentimes being used as the example of Guyana because a small island no bigger than the size of Barbados, with far less resources than Guyana, has developed itself into, a first world country. It is top of the charts for earning power for people. The average Singaporean earns almost 100,000. But if you look at the society, I left my phone one time in the car, and the taxi driver drove back and dropped it off at the hotel desk. And the hotel called me and said, "Hey, your cell phone is here." Similarly, in Japan, I left my phone, my glasses case in the taxi, and the taxi driver delivered it back to the hotel. So these things it may sound very trivial, but we have to train a society that is governed with morality, with decency, with respect. And like I said, today, a lot of these things don't sound very well in Guyana, because it seems to me now that the driving force has become money. It's all become this very money driven society. And that is fine. We need to take care of our commitments, our families, and so forth. But respect, honesty, dignity, and these things, they do count. And moreover, I want to say that this should have not never been replaced by money, because this is in our DNA as Guyanese. We're a hospitable group of people. We're an honest group of people. We thrived on these things long before we even thought of having oil and being this big
That's
global
right.
recognition. We had something that defined us as a Guyanese. But now I'm seeing more and more. I'm looking at society. Some of these things are slipping away. For instance, if I can just drop off track, there are times where I used to drive around, Georgetown, or come back from Trump trip, and I could find a cook shop. Now, I recently realized that it's so hard to find a cook shop. There's so much fast food than there is local home cook cuisine, and that's what defines us as a people. And also, if we're now looking at, and I said the minister was talking about heart disease. It's killing Guyanese now like nothing. Young people, even in their 30s, are dying of heart disease. I just had a friend of mine just died of heart disease that I know since I was growing up as a little boy. So this is where we're at a crossroads where development is happening. I agree it must happen. Development is good for our country. But I do think that it has to be measured with our culture, and it has to be measured with some semblance of respect and decency. And like I said, before you can sit down and think about taking this bribe or whatever the case may be, think about the fact that, what am I doing for the country? Is this going to help the country? Is this going to take us back? And is this going to help my family, or is this going to leave a stain on my family?
No, those are excellent words. Our well being is far more important than anything else. And well being as community members. I have noticed, even when I was a minister too, the drive to be violent at a domestic violence level. We were really, really bad. And it is all as a result of, our standards and so on dropping pretty dramatically, education, and then and things like that. So it is important that we dialogue with each other. And if it is one thing I want to ask our president, is to ensure that he collectively make these appointments with the people to set up whatever is the institution, or at least a dialogue to get recommendations from them. Okay, politics is sometimes a blood sport and all of that. But once the elections is over, you can start doing the things necessary to include, to govern wisely means to call up your rivals at a campaign stage and say a couple things to them. If they don't want to listen to you and they want to do whatever they want to do, well, fine. But at least engage them. And then when they come up with whatever recommendations, you don't be that, what you call, critical to the extent of saying, throwing it out. It is important that we manage to incorporate as much as possible from all the people of the country, and not necessarily opposition members, but from religious people, from labor, from a number of other sectors within the community, so that the people can come up with their solutions and the government can ensure the implementation. Implementation prior to the oil find in Guyana, prior to 2020, was going to always be a difficult thing because the monies were not there. When the oil started flowing in 2020 after we signed on in 2016, it meant now that what you could do for training at a vocational level, what you can do for training at social level, by talking to wife and husband not to go and fight and this and chop up and commit suicide and all that madness that. We have so much more monies now that it can work this society if it is spent properly, because management of the money from this economy is what is going to move it to places. And that is where we want youngsters to be on the ball. And I'm glad that I had both of you. Brian, we are coming to the end of the program, but I'd like to hear your views on some of the aspects of how we can help with well being. It is important that we help young people at sports and culture, their artistic tendencies. We give them some vote and appropriation in the next budget for these kinds of things, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, these are some very important things. As you know, we were heavily pushing for updating copyright law, making sure that our artists and our artistic um, citizens can actually earn a living based on their craft skills. And we were pushing for the opening or the establishment of the sport academies and things like this, so that our sports men and women could be groomed early up in a system that is designed to propel them in that kind of manner. But I want to take this time to speak to the Barbicians. There's a lot of development that is going to be taking place in Barbies in the next 5 years, especially those over the bridge in Region 6. The stadium will be completed shortly, and there's plans to have the which Suriname and Guyana from that end. And the influx of people and traditions will be so much intermixed that we as Guyanese have to really look at, curbing this corruption and putting and showcasing what it means to be a Guyanese to this other side of the world. Because everybody is going to find their way into Guyana. And we have the Palmares room that is building and development. And so there's so much going on over in agency. You guys have to be cognizant of what is needed in your communities. You need to have your representatives and have them speak on issues that will better your lives, increase your livelihoods, and things like this. You guys need representation. This is why we're bringing this program to you, so that you can understand that we're here. So, in whatever way we can to represent you, you know,
Excellent
and
point. Excellent point. Yes. Any additional
so,
point you were about to make there? Yeah.
no, no. Following
No.
anyone, following one.
Okay. Um, Colin, we have 2 minutes more. It's just a minute to go. You want to make a closing
Yeah,
statement?
I just want to say to the Barbicians that yes, the campaign is over and the elections is done, but the work of democracy still continues. And regardless of whichever side you voted for, we as a nation have to work together. The government of Guyana is not just the president or the administration, but it's also the opposition. It's the civil society groups, and like I said, I heard Brian talked about the president leaving a legacy for his children. One of the things I think that he wants to do is when he has a legacy, he would have said that his legacy included not this classical one-sided administration, government does it all, but one that is inclusive of opposition, private sector, members of the community, the diplomatic corps, and so forth. And I think that that would do well in incorporating all these ideas and not getting run, just not having this runaway train with corruption and greed and overextending of the arm of the state, but one that includes every part of the society, from the smallest man pushing the donkey cart or horse cart to folks in the higher levels of society.
Excellent. I want to congratulate the two young men here from the Alliance for Change, Colin Haynes and Brian Nobriga. This is what we'll have to continue. Forever in democracies, there will be challenges for organizations, political parties, and so on. We have gone through our challenge recently. That does not mean that we must not get up, dust off, and make another move moving forward. AFC on the move is again. It is important that we do not give up. And fundamental to that is the message out there as to what can be done. And we are urging Barbitians, please give us your ears on these occasions, and especially try as best as possible to be part and parcel of that movement for wanting a better Guyana. It is not just that, okay, well, fine, things are going to happen. They just sometimes don't happen. We have to egg the government on. We have to democratize the politics by virtue of making our statements. Because if we go on silent, a lot of wrong things can happen. It's in the silence of the electorate, the population, that things can go direly wrong. We do not want that to happen. And we will strive there to be with you on the ground, on the air as it is, and on whatever pulpits, whatever platforms. The Alliance for Change will remain here for a long, long time. So please, a very good night to you, Barbitians. Take care and see you next week on another AFC on the Move. Thank you very much.
Thank you.